everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. I'm Dr. Suzanne McDonald. I'm the chair of RCIScience, and we have a great evening planned. First, we want to acknowledge the land we're meeting on, or virtually meeting on, is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and now is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still a home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful for the opportunity to work on this land. Now, obviously, we know you could be joining us from anywhere, so please consider looking into your local land history and acknowledgement by visiting nativeland.ca. And we also recognize that talk is cheap, but actions are more important. So we encourage everybody to work for positive change. Tonight, we are awarding the 39th Fleming Medal for Excellence in Science Communication. It's very exciting. The first Fleming Medal was in 1982, and it went to David Suzuki for his work promoting environmental awareness, and he's obviously still doing that today. Since then, the award's been given to many luminaries of Canadian science, those who felt it was important to talk about their work to Canadians. Past winners include Helen Sawyer-Hogg, Chris Hadfield, Ivan Semenek, Ursula Franklin, Bob McDonald, and last year, Professor Timothy Caulfield. We are delighted that many past Fleming recipients are in the audience this evening. Connecting people with science is at the heart of what we do and why the Royal Canadian Institute recognizes Canadians who do that so well with the Fleming Medal. To tell us more about the Institute and the person for whom this medal was named, I'm delighted to introduce Jock Fleming, trustee of the RCIScience Board and descendant of Sir Sanford Fleming.
Thank you, Suzanne. Well, my great-great-grandfather, Sir Sanford Fleming, founded the Royal Canadian Institute in 1849 because he understood that science was going to drive the young country of Canada to be successful. By all accounts, he was someone who could rally people to a cause. Upon his death in 1915, the Ottawa Journal said, "A man of such genius, such initiation of huge projects, and the doer of such important deeds as Sir Sanford could have been no other than broad-minded and generous, but these terms left untouched the charm of his personality, his winning and affable nature, and his true greatness of heart." No tribute could have been more eloquent than that given by a humble surveyor who served him on a long and arduous undertaking. "It was ever a pleasure," he said, "to do our best for one so kind as Sir Sanford Fleming." As we join here today, virtually again because of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, we should remember that the force of personality can be used to rally people to the cause of science. The cause we celebrate tonight is communicating science, helping people understand how science makes our lives better and our country stronger. As recent events have shown, this is not always easy, and it can be frustrating. Our recipient tonight uses his own winning and affable nature to support the cause of science, especially to help people understand how science is lighting a path out of this pandemic. That's what we are celebrating tonight. I would like to note that during the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918, 1921, the Royal Canadian Institute shut down completely. There were few records of that time, no lectures were held, and if council met, it was very infrequently. Now, 100 years later, we can come together using technology enabled by science. Can you imagine going through this without Zoom or cell phones? We would be very lonely indeed. The Canadian Institute, as it was known when it was initially founded, received a royal charter in 1851 from Queen Victoria to champion science, the arts, and the manufacturers of Canada. Today, we enjoy a strong relationship with Canada's vice-regal representatives. Tonight, we are delighted to share remarks from our honorary vice patron, the Honourable Elizabeth Dowdeswell, Lieutenant Governor of Canada, or of Ontario.
Good evening, everyone. Bonjour, bonjour. As Honorary Vice Patron of the Royal Canadian Institute for Science, I'm delighted to add my voice to those honoring André Picard as the recipient of the 2021 Fleming Medal for Excellence in Science Communication. Year after year, this prestigious award only continues to prove its profound importance, along with all of the Institute's remarkable efforts. Because the value of scientific literacy, of a well-informed public, is not optional. It's essential. Essential for progress, essential for building trust and resilience, essential for the health and well-being of our democracy. You know, as the past 20 months have so plainly revealed, essential work is never easy work. And indeed, the COVID-19 pandemic has served to both deepen and clarify many of the considerable challenges facing us. The growth and great danger of misinformation. The urgent need to further bridge the gap between scientists, policymakers, and the public. And the crucial role the media must play in providing both timely and reliable information. Tonight's special event not only recognizes the significant work before us now to foster critical thinking and to deepen and expand scientific dialogue, but so too it is recognition of the way forward. For this is a celebration of one man and the remarkable example he has set. André's editor-in-chief, David Walmsley, has said that he is, and I quote, among the brightest beacons for those navigating Canada's medical system. And I can't think of a more appropriate metaphor to decide and describe his work. For especially in times of crisis, light must shine not only on our brave heroes, on the life-saving power of our innovation, on what we get right, but it must also shine on what we get wrong, on those voices that are forgotten, on those we overlook. Throughout his illustrious career, André has brought this light, his incisive and accessible commentary, to bear on some of our nation's most difficult and complex healthcare-related issues. In this endeavor, he has provided Canadians with reliable information and has helped tell our stories to one another, offering the human dimension and building empathy. There's perhaps no finer illustration of this than his recent book, Neglected No More, on the inhumane conditions in our nation's long-term care homes. It is a call that we must do better, a reminder that even the most complex science and policymaking must never stray far from the core, from people, particularly those who are vulnerable. As a nation, we would do well to heed this call for our continued progress, for the health of our planet, and for the strength of our very democracy. We're going to hear more about André's recent work and distinguished career in the upcoming conversation. But for now, on behalf of the people of Ontario, I offer to him my warmest congratulations and sincere thanks for his lasting and profound contributions to our public discourse. Congratulations, André. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
Thank you, Your Honor, for providing those inspiring words. Isn't that cool that we got to hear from our Lieutenant Governor? It's amazing. Well, as the 118th chair of the Royal Canadian Institute, I have the honor of reading the citation for tonight's Fleming Medal recipient. André has chosen not to be on screen because he thought that might be weird and awkward. For over 30 years, André Picard has contributed to the national public conversation on health and medicine. In addition to being a staff writer at the Globe and Mail, he is the author of 6 best-selling books, including the one the Lieutenant Governor mentioned, his most recent, Neglected No More, The Urgent Need to Improve the Lives of Canada's Elders in the Wake of a Pandemic. Without his contributions, Canadians today would undoubtedly be less knowledgeable, less healthy, and policymakers less accountable in their actions on a range of medical and social issues. From the AIDS epidemic and blood crisis of the mid-'80s to addiction, abortion, assisted death, mental health, and today's global COVID-19 pandemic, Mr. Picard's writing consistently puts the human face on medical science and health policy, marrying scientific precision with sincere and principled compassion. For these reasons, RCIScience recognizes André Picard with the 2021 Fleming Medal for Excellence in Science Communication. Please join us in congratulating André and welcoming him for a conversation with our board member, Dr. Samantha Yamin, aka Science Sam. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you so much, Suzanne and André. Congratulations yet again from myself and our many viewers watching. We can all do a collective round of applause. I am truly so honored and thrilled to get to have this conversation with you. I know that I'm one of many, many people in Canada and around the world who are both continually educated by you and inspired by the work that you do, bringing precision and empathy and a big picture perspective, combining so many different fields, right from the science, biology, medicine, to the big picture policy and the social aspect as well. So what you do is so unique and important and so necessary. And so it's an honor to get to chat with you. But we've complimented you enough. Here at RCI, we like to also put our guests on the spot. And so before we get into this wonderful discussion, we're going to play a little bit of a game. Is that okay with you?
Sure.
Right. So this is some questionable news. Okay, we're going to put you on the spot because you just won an award, and that's what we do over here. It's a quick game to spot misinformation. We're going to display a headline on the screen, and André, you're going to vote on whether you think it's real or something we made up. Now, we're not talking about whether it's accurate or not. It's just if it appeared in the media. And for all of those tuning in at home, you get to participate too. If you're tuning in on YouTube, you can vote directly in the polls, or you can drop real versus fake in the comments if you're on Facebook or anywhere else watching this as well. So, are you ready?
Ready as I'm going to be.
Okay, let's see our first headline. Should I read it? Or
I can read it too, yeah.
Oh, okay, you read this one.
Well, I think that one's fake.
Plummeting sperm counts, shrinking penises, toxic chemicals threaten humanity. You think that is a fake headline. What did everyone else vote? Let's see what the true answer is. This is an article more than 8 months old. It's an 8-month-old article. That doesn't excuse the headline there, but there we have it. This is a real headline from The Guardian. Remember, we're not commenting on whether or not it's accurate, just whether it was a real headline.
I was going to guess it was the Daily Mail, but I'm surprised it's The Guardian. Right.
Was that a face palm too? Okay, let's do the next one.
Why you shouldn't worry about the new mystery virus. That's probably a true headline.
Is it familiar?
That sounds pretty familiar. It's back from March and April of 2020, yes.
All right, let's see. Oh, it is a real headline. And in fact, it was a headline accompanying an article you wrote, but it was actually back in 2012. I know you write a lot, so I don't know if you remember this one, but I think it was about MERS, right? The Middle Eastern, as they call it, version of SARS. So real headline. Any thoughts or reactions to that one?
Well, thankfully, I got that one right as a headline, and I think I got that one right as a column. MERS was not a big problem. We don't have a lot of camels in Canada, so we escaped that one pretty well.
Absolutely. This was a good one. It was real, happened to be true as well, so that's good. I think we got one more here. One vaccine to rule them all, the promise of a universal COVID vaccine. Real headline or fake?
I think that's definitely real.
Definitely real. Viewers, real or fake? Comment, vote in the poll. And let's see, it is fake. Although I think there's some promise there with universal vaccines for coronaviruses, but no one did the Lord of the Rings reference yet, I guess. That one is fake. Oh, last one here. Ontario sheep kidnappers say infected flock is in protective custody.
Oh, I think that one's true too. I have a vague recollection of the sheep kidnappings.
Okay. Everyone vote real or fake, and it is real, and it is also another one of yours. I don't think we've ever played this with a reporter before. It's fun when you get to put them on the spot in two ways.
Well, I don't write the headlines, but I have some vague recollection of the story. So.
Yeah, that's a common thing, and I think a great point of discussion. Something right off the bat that we can get into are headlines. We hear so much discussion about people being upset at headlines, people being alarmed by headlines. For viewers who may be less familiar with how the journalistic process works, can you tell us a bit about that process of getting a headline after you've written an article?
Yeah, so I write the articles. The headlines are generally done by editors, by copy editors, and it's really an art. So I know people complain about it a lot, but my response is often to them, no, we can't put the whole story in the headline. It's often 5 or 6 words. It has to be to the point. It has to be, it has to be catchy, so people will read the article. It has to be accurate, but it doesn't always have a lot of nuance. So it really is an art. I'm really glad I don't have to write the headlines. It's really difficult. I think my copy editors do it right 99.9% of the time, and sometimes it's a little exaggerated or it's not quite right. And the good thing with the internet now is we could fix them. Once things are wrong in the newspaper, we used to never be able to fix anything. It was done. But I think people expect too much from a headline. So I hope you read the headlines and they entice you, but please read the articles where you get a little bit more nuance.
It's true. People really expect one tweet or one headline to solve everything. And the point is to entice you to read more, hopefully without misinforming you. So thank you for sharing that, because it's something I think people don't realize. They get mad at the author when it's like, it's part of the whole team, but also just read the rest.
And I think that, the thing we should not forget, the same is true of articles and columns. I write a column that's an exact word count. It's 750 words. It's not 740. It's not 760. And people, I often get 3,000 word emails saying, here are the things you left out. And I say, yeah, you're quite right. I left them all out, but I have 750 words. So boil down your email and send it back to me and then tell me what I missed. We work within constraints, the size of headlines, the size of columns, people's attention span. So there is a lot of things that people don't recognize that are limitations in our daily work.
I couldn't agree more. And I spend a lot of my world on social media where the constraints are very, very restrictive. So it's an important thing to always keep in mind, whatever you're reading, wherever it is, that this is probably not the full story. So treat it with that level of, that level of awareness when you're reading it. Now, you've been a staff, of your many, many accomplishments, you've been a staff writer at the Globe and Mail since 1987, if I have it correct. So we really were curious to get a perspective on, over the decades, how, from your perspective, science journalism has changed, whether it has to do with clickbait and where things are being posted, or just in general, how being a science journalist has changed over the years.
I think science journalism has changed in the same way that journalism has. If I could simplify, I would say the good journalism has gotten way better and the bad journalism has gotten way worse. And a lot of the middle has fallen out. We used to have a lot more science and health reporters. A lot of community city papers no longer have beats at all. So I think a lot fewer people, but there's a lot more excellence. So there's some good and bad in there. There's some fabulous new platforms, Vox, for example, and ProPublica, these things, Stat. These are all really excellent sources of really good science information that didn't exist, and they're strictly web-based. So there's some real good, but it's changed a lot. It's dramatically different. I'm coming on to my 35th anniversary at the Globe, and it's not the same at all. I'd say we're a lot more skeptical. I think we Don't just parrot what's in medical journals anymore like we did 35 or 40 years ago. So it's more sophisticated. And then the other big change is technology. Just what we're working with is it's a very different world. I have the privilege of spending lots of time with students, both medical students, journalism students, and young people. I tell them a horror story about, I was around before we had cell phones and before we had the internet and all these things, and they just can't wrap their mind around that. That was the reality. We used to know what a library was. We only had one.
Wait, what's a library? No, I'm just joking.
We only had one deadline a day. We didn't have any social media, so it was a very, very different world to operate in.
Absolutely. I mean, the scope of the role has also grown, as you say, with the promotion online and all of that, but that comes with good things and it comes with challenges as well. So journalism as a whole has taken this shift. Do you see that a similar type of shift in the way science and medicine itself and maybe even our healthcare systems, although I feel that they change much more slowly? Do you feel science and medicine has changed as well?
At science, I think, has not changed as much. I think science communication has changed as much as journalism, probably more. There used to be no science communication. It was like we publish in the journal, and sometimes we deign to speak to lowlifes like journalists. That was really the attitude. Researchers didn't like speaking to journalists except a select few, etc. So it's very different. Now people are out there promoting themselves. They're more accessible. It's part of their if you want to be on the tenure track, you've got to be quoted in the media. So it's very different. There's not 10 journals anymore. There's 10,000 and half of them are just garbage. So it's a very different world for scientists as well. And it's just, people have changed. Scientists are normal people too. They are on social media, their kids are. So they're not afraid of this stuff the way they used to be. When I started out, a lot of scientists were petrified about talking to journalists. They didn't dare say anything, but now they understand the process better. They're very participatory. Lots of scientists are really big on and really good on social media.
I mean, I can say even just in the time when I was doing my training, science communication became an increasingly bigger thing. And in the beginning, I didn't even know what it was, let alone that I could have a career in it. And then towards the end of my PhD, I went to workshops and I was learning, and then I was starting to do it. So even in the last, let's say 8 years, I feel that change has really accelerated, which is a good thing.
Yeah, like this terminology like KT, knowledge translation, that didn't exist a few years ago. Risk communication was a really, really obscure field for people, and now everybody does it. So yeah, it has changed for the better, the communication side.
I will say scientists still are afraid of talking to journalists in my experience, but the good ones they can trust, like you, maybe less so. Now, I want to go to a question that we had brought in from Angela Zhao, which I think asks this question specifically in the context of COVID. So let's turn over to that.
My question for André Picard is, how has the COVID-19 pandemic changed how you report science? Additionally, how has it changed science journalism moving forward, and what are some lessons learned?
Yeah, it's a good series of questions. I think for me, it hasn't. I think the big change is I've become this one-trick pony. I've written about very little else but COVID since January 2020. I first started writing about this in January 2020 before it came to Canada. I could tell it was, something important. But other than that, it hasn't really changed. It's what I write about all the time. I write about a lot of infectious disease. I write about this intersection of policy and medicine and social realities. So that's always where I work. I think the other big change for me is just getting a lot more attention. What I do is fairly obscure, to be honest. The lieutenant governor was overly kind in her words, but saying I'm the best at what I do. But the reality is not very many other people do it. So it's a very small pool to be the best among. So you have to recognize that not a lot of people write about policy, and it's suddenly become, or health policy specifically, and it's become far, far more important. So I've benefited from this in some ways, but also it's a lot more intensity, a lot more pressure to do a lot more things because of COVID. So again, I think like everything else, I tend to be a pretty pragmatic person. I see good and bad in everything.
And if I can just, I think we all feel the toll of thinking about COVID, talking about COVID professionally and in our personal lives. How How are you handling that? How are you basically? Because it's not an easy thing to have to live and deal with for work.
Yeah, it's not an easy thing, but I don't feel I'm in a position to complain. I'm in a very privileged position. I have a great job at a great media outlet. They're very thoughtful of how the employees are treated. If if we're stressed out or it's too much, they don't have no hesitation taking a break. I know that my kids are grown up. I have it easy. I can be flexible. So I have a lot more time to talk about, my colleagues who have young children struggling working at home. They have it way worse than me. So I don't feel I have any right or, that I should complain about anything, because I recognize that others have it much worse. And I have to say, at my paper, I think in a lot of media, we've actually become much closer, even with our competitors. We were much more sharing, much more jovial, because we're all in this together. And within our newsroom, we have this COVID team that meets every morning, and very, very supportive. Sometimes it's too much and we bail somebody out, and, their kids are sick or whatever. And that is so important. I think it's made the workplace actually, maybe paradoxically, a much better place. Even though we're all working alone, we're actually working much better together.
That's really nice to hear. And I think really important to see also the collegiality too, because especially in Canadian media, it can, it can be a small space. So it's nice that we're having some banding together, especially during this time, no less. And we're glad that you're able to report on it, because again, as was said, there aren't a lot of people who have that big picture perspective I think one of the biggest shortcomings during the pandemic in our conversations has definitely been the lack of understanding of translating the science to policy. And that's what gets me every day is where the disconnect and the silos between the actual policy and what's known, and getting those things to meld, even though when it's public health, they are essentially the same thing, has been definitely my biggest facepalm moment every single day.
Yeah, I have a lot of sympathy for, a lot of people are thrown into this, whether they're scientists or journalists or everyday people. And it's hard these systems are complicated and they're complex, and sometimes deliberately so. So it's not easy to navigate them. So again, I have a great advantage that I've been doing this for a long time. And I know the bureaucracy, I know how the systems are structured, and that's not easy to learn. And it's just something you learn over time.
Absolutely. Now, I want to pivot, because while many people know you for your COVID reporting, you've again been doing this and talked about so many big issues over the years. And of course, as part of that, as was mentioned, you've authored 6 best-selling books. And so I think, just out of interest for those maybe aspiring writers who are watching and people who want to understand a bit more about your method, what kind of tips the scale for you to make you think, okay, this topic needs a full book as opposed to, a series of articles? This needs a deep dive. What is that moment for you that hits you when you're like, it's time to sit down and write this?
Yeah, I think, as a journalist, we like analogies. The analogy I always like to use is my daily work is kind of snapshots. And sometimes you think, well, this merits a motion picture, right? It needs a more in-depth look. You need to step back. And when do I do that? I think I do it when there are really big issues that you feel have a legacy. So I've written, my first book was about tainted blood. That's sort of an issue that I followed literally for years and years. The people getting infected by tainted blood with hepatitis C and HIV back in the 80s. And to me, that was important to write a book because I knew that it had a lot of impact. It's changed the way we regulate drugs. It's changed our perception of the worst pandemic in history, which is not COVID, it's AIDS by far. So that was an opportunity for me to, I think, just to bring together a lot of the snapshots I had done into something bigger. And the same with my most recent book. It was done more quickly, but it was just, here's an opportunity. Who's hit hardest by COVID? And it was by far, by a long shot, it was people living in congregate settings. So people living in long-term care. And it was an opportunity for me to say, this is a jumping off point to write about an issue that I've written about for many years, is how we treat seniors, our lack of home care, our lack of community supports. It's something I lived with my parents being in care with dementia for a long time. So it's just a perfect opportunity to do something that I probably should have done years ago, but there's just not an appetite for it, right? You have to write these things when the public is attentive to them and when publishers are interested. So you jump at the opportunities. But I will say, I think, everybody has at least a book in them. Everybody has a passion, has something that they're interested in. And I think the opportunities are there. You don't go in it to make money. I literally hope to break even when I do a book. I hope I don't lose too much money anymore, but it has to be something you're passionate about and you care about, especially in Canada. It's a very small market, but it is fulfilling and it is rewarding to do it.
And even you just, to me, it was, having followed your reporting over the last year, I was aware of the long-term care crisis, especially with the pandemic. But the fact that even at this time, when I knew you were so busy, you would still take time to write the book on that in itself was a signal that, okay, this is an issue that hasn't been solved yet. This is something that still has outstanding concerns that are bigger than this moment. That's what it signaled to me. And then obviously upon reading it, realizing exactly what those are and how long-reaching they are, I think is, but that in of itself was almost the headline for me to say, oh, I guess this is something I didn't know about, and this is much bigger than this moment. I also wanted you touched on it already, your book, The Gift of Death. For folks who maybe are newer to this topic, it's a scandal that, Andre, you've called Canada's worst ever preventable public health disaster. And I got that quote before, but you just said it again. So I think that just emphasizes to people what a big deal this was. It left roughly 2,000 recipients of blood and blood products infected with HIV/AIDS and another 30,000 infected with hepatitis C. So this was huge. It was a shocking, necessary piece of writing on negligence and something that could have been avoided, and a critical discussion of what is, I think, at the root of so much misinformation and distrust today, understanding the interplay of all these different players in our healthcare system. So the first thing I wanted to ask you on this topic is, when it comes to this, have we learned our lessons? Did we? It's been what, 25 years since you wrote it. Have the things you were hoping to achieve with the book happened? Have we learned from it?
I think we've learned some lessons. We're really good. I often say one thing Canada does better than anything in the world is write reports, as analyze our failings. And the Creever report was one of the great public services ever done. It was a massive, really thorough report that told us how to fix a lot, not just like the blood system, but healthcare more generally. There are many, many lessons there, and very few of them were applied. So we learned the lessons, but we don't apply them is, I think, the issue. So my book was in part to do an easier read than the 1,200-page Creever report was to do a 300-page book. So that was part of it, and to put people in it. So that's what we do. So we always make a little bit of progress, but we don't do it quickly enough. So to me, that's the frustration. And we see it again with COVID. I remember covering SARS 15 years ago. There were two good reports published about that, the Naylor report and the McPherson report. And you could literally take the Naylor report today and substitute the word SARS with SARS-CoV-2, and it would be accurate almost to the letter. And that's really, really depressing. So on my down days, I think of that. I think, what is the point of all this? Because we've learned absolutely nothing. But then I recognize, we have implemented a little bit of it, almost backhandedly and reluctantly, but we've made some changes.
That's something I think people don't often realize is our policies are there's a lot of knowledge in amongst our policymakers. It's very evidence-based in the approach. But again, it's always that next step where it feels like things tend to get more complicated. And that's the part of the discussion that we don't tend to have. We tend to really focus on the things that I think there's good evidence for. And the challenge is always the implementation and logistics, which is interesting to hear that, we're still kind of facing that, even with this new pandemic, this new situation.
And I think that's true. No, it's true not only of politics, but it's true of medicine and science. We don't do a lot of study of implementation science. We write these wonderful, we do these fabulous studies. I was doing a panel earlier today about, looking at regenerative medicine and stem cells. And we do all this massive, wonderful work on stem cells. We're on the verge of having products that people can use, but our system is totally incapable. They're not ready at all to integrate this. So what's going to happen? It's going to take 10 years after we have one of these great drugs before they're used. And that's so frustrating because we know, it's nothing without implementation. It's like, what's the point of having a new drug if nobody can access it, if it's not affordable? There's no point. And we don't pay any attention to that. And we don't study how we implement. We don't study how we fail at implementation. We don't study how we price drugs and why. All this stuff is just left up to industry or to chance sometimes.
And then it's often a very challenging part. It's the part where we would really benefit from having more information and more discussions and letting people in on the behind the curtains, how you go from something discovered in the lab with a big juicy headline to actually getting it into people. That next part is fascinating and very multidisciplinary, and we don't tend to talk about it too much. Now, I was thinking, in your book on this particular topic, you talk about the public health role, the role of the Red Cross, of course, different government responses, different companies who were involved, the industries involved. And I think these are a lot of people who right now kind of get lumped into one group, or we kind of just think like these are all the science people, and we don't really think about who is involved in each step, who's responsible for what, who's accountable for what. And I think that fuels, in my perspective, fuels a lot of the distrust that we have right now towards these different groups. Often we'll say, well, I don't trust pharma, therefore I don't trust the entire vaccine. And that's a really big umbrella to put someone under. So I'm wondering how you, someone who's looked deeply at some of the issues of the past, how you reconcile rightful reasons for distrust with different institutions and still move forward and have a positive outlook and rebuild trust.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is, as I said earlier, I think you have to have some pragmatism. You have to recognize, I'm not big on black and white. I don't think there's a lot of black and white in science, and there shouldn't be in policy. People who say all pharma is bad, that's not true. There's great science in pharma. There are some people who make way too much money. There's bad things in pharma, bad things in government. There's great scientists in government. There's great policymakers. There's terrible policymakers too. I think we have to judge on results rather than on what category or clan you belong to. And that's people don't really like that. People like being dogmatic. They like politicizing things, and that doesn't usually give good results. So I think I approach things giving people the benefit of the doubt, but also at the same time having a lot of skepticism. I think skepticism is probably the most important tool that a journalist can have, but we often go a little too far, and we have cynicism, and we have to balance that and stay on the right side of that line, because being cynical is not going to be helpful.
I mean, what you just said, I hope that we can just snip that, and I need to share that instantly, because it's the piece that I think is so crucial, just realizing that there's a duality. There can be some skepticism, maybe a little bit of cynicism, but at the same time, realizing where it fits into the bigger picture. That would really change everything. And I think it's a message I'm really glad you shared, and I hope more of us can start to learn from even just this current moment, how true that can be and how important it is.
Yeah, and if I could give an example, I get a lot of, we get a lot of criticism on social media. You get more than I because you're a woman, so you're targeted more. But, people say things like, you're a shill for big pharma because you believe in vaccination. And I say, I can believe in vaccination and say that the profits of Pfizer are obscene. I can say both of those things. Both are true. And the fact that they make way too much money does not negate the benefit of the vaccine. That's a different issue. And let's address both of them. And I write about both of those. So again, it's about pragmatism. It's about skepticism. And you have to apply them to both ends of the spectrum.
If I had $1 for every time I was called a pharma shill, I would be as rich as people think I am.
Exactly. If I had a nickel, I would be very wealthy. But
yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, I think that's the key thing is I mean, you're very critical of different companies and agents. You're a journalist. It's your job to be critical of everyone. And yet the fact that you still see the value in this should signal in itself to people that, okay, there's more going on here. We should take a step back. We can be critical and at the same time still trust the products of things, because it really We have to take each thing in strides, basically, and not just make a broad brush. Thank you for saying it. Now, Ivan Smeniuk is one of the people, one of your colleagues, a science reporter at the Globe and Mail. Many may recognize from their regular readings as well. He was among those who nominated you for this award, and we're very glad he did. And he said one of your works that really inspired him in particular was the guidebook that you wrote, Mindset. And I want to talk on this because I didn't know about it. I'm really grateful this pointed me to it. But it's a fabulous guidebook available for free online if anyone's interested, by a journalist, for journalists, on best practices when reporting on mental health. And it was really wonderful. I learned a lot from going through it. In the intro, you said on this topic, is it our role to sit back, observe, and report dispassionately on this sad state of affairs, or to proactively set out to bring about social change? The short answer is a bit of both. And I felt that really encapsulated the approach that I see you taking and that I admire that you take for both. So I want to first just see kind of your perspectives on writing that guidebook.
Yeah, so it's a group effort. So there's a lot of us tended to be older journalists, but people who've written a lot about mental health, made a lot of mistakes over the years writing about it, and thought, well, why don't we share with this is a guidebook aimed at journalists, but it's also now used in some policy circles, which is nice. It's just about, watch your language, be careful how you describe people, say a person living with schizophrenia as opposed to a schizophrenic, the terminology we used to use. We caution people about how to write about suicide. Don't shy away from it. Write about it like other things, with compassion, with exact science, etc. So there's just a lot of practical tips in there. The really nice thing about it is it's been translated into several languages. It's used around the world now, so it's a nice little guidebook. So it's really nice to see that happen. But it's just about, I think it's about giving back. When you've been around a long time, you learn some stuff. And I think I always stress to the younger journalists that we share this with, this is all built on mistakes, right? There's no shame in getting things wrong. We all do, but learn from them. The only shame is if you don't learn from it. So all our learnings went into this little booklet. And the larger question that you asked at the end, I think now I write opinion columns. So I tend to just, write opinionated stuff. But as journalists, we tend to try and be more balanced, more fair, present things. But this notion that we're, magically dispassionate, etc., that's nonsense. And again, I tell my journalism students, nothing wrong with having passion and caring, but you have to try and be fair. I think ultimately that's the word I use now. When you write a story, be fair. It can't be magically, exactly two sides. There's rarely two exact sides to any story. There's often 3 or 4 different ones. And in some stories, I remind people there are 2 sides. There's not, the vaccines are not bad. That's not a legitimate side to say that vaccines kill people or poison them. That's not. But what's legitimate is to say there are side effects, and here's why, and here's how to mitigate them. We don't set things up as magic, but we also don't report on nonsense, hopefully.
Yeah, no false balance, please. No pretending there are 2 sides to climate crisis, for example, when that's not true. Similarly with vaccines. See, this fascinates me because I'm very passion driven, and it can be a bit of it really, of course, focuses our attention on certain things. What approach do you take as someone who's also excellent at bringing perspectives from different fields beyond healthcare into the policy and et cetera? What do you do before a story that could be really controversial or could be one that maybe people think only has this one side? What do you do to make sure that you're not missing a perspective that maybe wouldn't have originally occurred to you?
Yeah, I'm a big reader, so I like to read a lot of stuff. I like to read things that I disagree with, to be challenged, to think. So if I'm writing about, it's a column saying that ivermectin doesn't work, I read a lot of stuff about people touting it, saying it's the greatest thing ever, because I want to know what their arguments are and what the criticisms are going to be of me. So I do a lot of that. I talk to a lot of people. I am privileged in that I've been around a long time, so people will take my calls. Again, I tell my students, the most important people in my stories are not in my stories. They're people I talk to on background who help me understand the science. I'm not a scientist myself, so you need people to to help you out with that. And I say, well, if I say this in this lay language, is that right? And sometimes they'll kind of shudder and say no, or sometimes they'll say yes, but I don't like it. And I say, well, too bad. I write for a lay audience. So I really benefit from a lot of interactions with a lot of scientists and clinicians who've helped me over the years.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And also, I mean, great. And that's why you're able to do the great work that you do. And that's why people can trust you too, because they can trust that you've gone through all those layers before you're going to put something out there. So I have, I think, a few more questions here, and then we're going to go take some audience questions. So while we're doing that, I just want to say, if anyone watching, I'm sure you have tons of questions for André. Don't hold back. Whatever is on your mind. I mean, there's such a pivotal time right now. So please feel free to go ahead and ask any questions that you have wherever you're tuning in from, and we're going to get through as many of them as we can. But before we move into that, I got to ask you, I spend a lot of time thinking about misinformation and disinformation, rumors that people put out there. Have you, either based on data, your experience, or even your feeling right now, has there been a big change in anti-science messaging? Have you seen it evolve over your tenure?
I think there's been a big change, but also I'm a big fan of history, of medical history and health history. I think it's always very informative. We can understand almost every problem we have today if we know some history. So I think, first of all, I remember that, misinformation has been around forever. I lived a long time in Montreal, where in 1905, there were 20,000 people who marched against vaccination. So this is not a new thing. They carried coffins with needles on them, for example. And and that's at a time when the city that was probably more than a fifth of the city, almost a quarter of everyone in the city. So we don't have that kind of opposition anymore. People are much more sophisticated now. Now, the difference is people have a much better megaphone. It's called the internet. So I think you have to try and find that balance. So there are days where I go, oh, this is depressing. But then I realize, how many people is this really, and how many are bots? So I think you have to keep that context, that there's not that many anti-science, anti-vax people out there, but they are very loud and they're very organized. So I think the big change for me in the last 10 years is just the sophistication of the movement. If it's a movement, I'm not sure that anti-vax is a movement. It's more of a ragtag collection of people with all kinds of strange ideas. But I think what's changed it is there's a lot of big money in that. So these are people who are always complaining about pharma. And I say, do you know how much Dr. Mercola makes? He makes millions. He's sort of the guru of nonsense. I like to shout out to him as often as I can. And there are really a dozen people in the world who are spreading misinformation, and there's a bunch of poor suckers following them, large part people who are well-intentioned, well-meaning. So I try to not be critical of people who are out protesting, but I'm critical of those who are spurring them on with misinformation, with lies, and worst of all, profiting immensely from it. So that's the part that rankles me. That people have, believe things that are untrue, that they don't understand science. That's been around forever, and that's not as bad as it's been. It's much better today. So there again, there's good and bad in there, but it's when you're on the receiving end of that megaphone, as you know very well, it can be pretty intense and it can be pretty depressing and degrading at times.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a very loud minority of people. And even when you said the 20,000 people in that march some 100 years ago, compared to now, where there will be a lot of noise online and then 50 people show up, I think that's important perspective for us to keep in mind, and to also remember on those days when we're frustrated. Like, this is just chances are, if it's online, it's a bot that's attacking you, and so I really just brush it off to the side. And the great irony being that it's very persistent, and so it feels like a lot more than it is, despite the fact that I'm sure you get this message too of like, we're just using this to make money or whatever, and we just want to keep being able to talk about COVID because for media purposes is what things that people message me, and it's like, no, I'm ready to move on. I think we're all ready to move on. There are other things we'd like to move on to.
Yeah, to me, the tragic part of it is that people, say like mums of young children who are
Yeah.
sincerely worried about, they just don't know that, geez, I don't like sticking chemicals in my kid. And that's a genuine fear. It's legitimate, and they're being taken advantage of. That's the part that bothers me. And their children are harmed, and they're harmed as a result. That's the part that should sicken us.
Exactly. That's the part that I think keeps us focused on this too, is to help those people. I'll just call out Counterhatecom. They've done wonderful analyses showing exactly what you mentioned about the disinformation dozen and people who profit off spreading disinformation with really malicious intent here, just really to make a buck, that then leads to these webs of misinformation that people get entangled in. And so that's a really great resource if people really want to see the dollar signs next to it, just to really show that there is a reason why people are spreading lies, and it's not a good one.
Yeah.
Now, we have one more question before we head into the audience questions from John Farrow from Science Up First.
Hi, Andre. Thanks for all the great work you do bringing science and health information to Canadians. I'm a big fan of your work. I work on a project called Science Up First, which fights COVID misinformation on social media. And with that role comes a lot of pressure to be accurate and trustworthy and not spread misinformation ourselves. And you have tremendous power as probably the most trusted health journalist working in Canada. People really listen to what you have to say. So how do you deal with the pressure of that power and responsibility? Thank you.
Okay. Great. First, I'll say Science Up First, a great initiative. There are many that have sprung up during COVID, which is really nice to see, and especially that a lot of young people. This is what gives me hope. I think young people really have gotten the misinformation stuff much better than, who spreads misinformation is my generation, to be honest. It's older people who just were around before social media, and they just are naive about this, to be honest. So to answer the question, I don't feel a lot of pressure, to be honest. I've done this same type of work for a long time. There's always been that spotlight. Maybe it's a little bit brighter. But I think one of the most important things for me is I don't tend to rush things. And I have that privilege. There's so much pressure today to get stuff on the web and do it immediately. And I'm from an older generation where we had one deadline a day, and and I still feel like that. I would rather have I'd rather be the last one to the story and have it right than be the first one and have it half right, or even worse, have it wrong. So I think, again, when I speak to younger students, I say, don't get caught up in this nonsense about our readers don't care if we got a story online 4 minutes earlier than the Toronto Star. To be honest, nobody does that calculation except journalists, and we're just hurting ourselves. So do it right, take the time to do it. And I think our readers and our viewers benefit from that. So I think that's the number one thing that I do, is just take my time. And then the other thing is something I alluded to earlier. Again, I say to the students, to the journalism students, the most important stuff I do is not what I write, it's what I don't write. So it's just being able to choose and just not giving, a platform to some stuff that's dubious or that I'm not sure about. People often write me, why didn't you write about this topic? And I don't write about a topic if I don't have a point of view. And I don't have a point of view on everything. I'm like, kind of feel like, if I'm on the one hand, on the other hand, I don't write that, because that doesn't make for a good opinion column. So I wait till I have something that I want to address and I have some passion about, and then I do it. So that, again, that's a privilege that I have. I'm not the person in the newsroom who the editor says, go write about ivermectin. I saw it on CNN. And they're just like ears in a headlight. And that's not a good position to be in. And they depend a lot on scientists and on people who are parsing the information like you're doing. That's become really, really important for journalists, these intermediaries.
I just want to shout louder for the people in the back that what you said, you don't always need to be the first to have a hot take. And when there's no hot take, you don't need to say something. That would be very helpful right now in the context of the Omicron variant. If people could just wait, that would be great. Instead of just rushing to put a story out there when there's not much of a story yet.
So I had this discussion earlier this week with my editor, who said, we want to really write about Omicron. And I was like, all I would say is we don't know much yet. And she said, well, yeah, let's write that. That's what I want to know. So that's, so I don't mind doing that. But the hot take, it's going to sweep the world. Nobody has any idea. We'll have to see. And we live in a very impatient time, and especially after almost 2 years of pandemic, people just want to know everything immediately, and that's not the reality of science and not the reality of a virus.
And there are, I mean, just to counter, I mean, there are pressures from the social media platforms, the way that the algorithms kind of are coded. They want consistency, and maybe your audiences want consistency. There's a lot of pressure to put out content all the time and to tweet every day and to post on Instagram every day. So there's a lot of different directions where that pressure comes from to post constantly. But I think what you said is the advice I try to remember when I feel that pressure too, is just because, I mean, you don't really have to. And sometimes people will appreciate quality over quantity, especially in a world where everyone's just blitzing them with new content every day. I think that's a really hard thing to do, to decide not to speak on something and to step back, maybe just amplify someone instead. But I really think if we did more of that, we could be in a slightly different situation.
You know, I speak to a lot of medical students, and I often say, I always tell them the three most important words in medicine are, I don't know. And there's no ever any shame in saying that. People, that doesn't bother people. What bothers people is being bullshitted, is being told stuff that is not true or that's exaggerated. When a doctor says to you, you know, I've looked you over, I'm not exactly sure what's wrong with you, but we're going to work on it. That's comforting to people, that they're not being lied to, and they're not, you know, that sometimes we just don't know stuff. So if you're true to yourself, if you admit what you know and you don't know, I think you serve yourself much better and your audience.
And admitting I don't know, but what you're experiencing is still valid is such a key. Like, again, this duality, I think that's a really big theme here with what we've been discussing, is the gray area of our world, which is especially, healthcare is especially gray, and just accepting that things can have multiple truths to them at once, no matter how uncomfortable that makes us feel. I want to move into some questions from the audience. We have some really wonderful, thoughtful questions here. And I'll encourage folks tuning in, please continue putting in your questions. We have, you know, the top healthcare journalist in Canada and in the world with us here today. So let's get those questions asked and learn, because this is a great time to learn more and have people be more aware about the journalistic process and the many important stories you've told over your career. So one here comes from someone I think who wants to learn a little bit more about your process as a journalist. They say, what strategies can we use in order to have the public health authorities disclose the right information without creating mass hysteria? So as a journalist, how might you approach getting the right information out without overhyping it?
Yeah, first of all, I don't worry about hysteria. I think people are way more calm than we give them credit for. I am a big reader about risk communication. You know, there's a famous risk communication guru who always says, you know, never tell people not to panic, because the only thing that makes them panic is telling them that. And that's true. You know, in my career, I've covered many disasters, you know, wars and plane crashes and mine disasters and school shootings. And people are not panicked. It's quite the opposite. The creepiest thing about covering those things is how eerily quiet they are. People are very calm in stressful situations. So I think we have a lot of misconceptions about how people react. So I don't worry about the panic part. The hype part, yeah, you have to worry about. You temper your words, be careful. You know, don't ever use the C word, cure. If you're thinking of another one, I'm thinking of cure, but never use words like that. And people like Tim Caulfield, you know, a past winner of the Fleming Medal, he has a really good list of, here are words that you should never say as a health promoter of science communication, and there's a list of them, and be careful with those. And it never serves you to overstate things. Again, I think, does it get, you know, I often hear that, oh, well, you just want clicks. And that's, again, I think that's a myth. Clicks matter to some sites, but to very marginal ones. The sites that are depending on clicks are probably the ones you're not ones you want to get science information from. So a paper like the Globe, it's much more sophisticated. Yes, clicks matter, but what matters more is, we call it stickiness. So do people read the whole article? That really matters to advertisers, that people are engaged. What matters is they stay, that they subscribe and they believe in the brand. So it's different. Clicks are a very minor part of the new media landscape. It's all about having a brand and having people who are loyal to you. That's what it's about. And the way you do that is with really good journalism. And the sites, the papers that are doing best are exactly that. Those who have an eye on the long game and not the short game.
I couldn't agree more. This is so true and so important on every aspect of social media too. It's not just the video with the most views or likes that makes it credible. There has to be a lot more depth to it. It has to make sense and be legitimate all the way through. And often looking for people who seem to be reacting and having a conversation with their listeners and really being meaningful, caring not just that you share, like, and click on something, but that you've learned something and that you've done something with it. That feels very true in the social media world as well. You can really tell a lot just by the way that someone might prioritize getting retweeted versus conveying understanding. Really helps you see who's a red flag communicator in my books. We had a question here, just while we're still on this kind of topic about vaccine hesitancy. Someone wants to know, what do you think is the best way to reach out to the 10 to 15% of the Canadian population who seem to be hesitant about vaccinations and to those who seem to distrust or misunderstand science? We chatted a bit about it, but I want to see if you have anything else to add here.
Yeah, I think the message that I hear from the experts, and that's what I do, I just sort of parse what the experts say and relay it. So I don't know anything myself, but my job is to communicate and boil stuff down. I think what all the experts say on this, and I've been hearing this for 30 years, is meet people where they're at. That's a really important thing. Don't look down on them. Don't badmouth them. Don't say they're stupid, because they're not. They have doubts, and doubts are a good thing. Skepticism is an excellent thing to have, but people are again wavering into cynicism and to conspiracy theories, and that's where it goes wrong. So meet them where they are. You don't want to get your child vaccinated. Well, why? Well, they already get too many vaccines. So why is that a bad thing? Well, the immune system can only handle well, I can show you this research that shows you could give theoretically a child 100 vaccines in a day. It wouldn't be a pleasant day, but not bad for their immune system for other reasons. So one more is not the issue. So you meet them where they're at. Oh, well, kids don't get sick. Well, that's true. Most kids don't get sick, but look at this case of a child who died. We've had 17 pediatric deaths in Canada from COVID. And I get mail saying, well, it's only 17. And I say, what kind of monster thinks we should have more dead children? We should have no dead children in Canada, ever. Very few children die, and we should be proud of that. And we should never accept a death, regardless whether it's COVID or the flu or measles or anything, or car crashes. We should simply not accept pediatric deaths. And that's the context I write about. And that's why I think you meet people. You put that stuff into context. Well, why is it okay for anyone to die? It's not okay for a kid to get sick. We should try and avoid that as best we can. And when you have the tools, use them. So just meet people where they're at, answer their questions. It's tedious, it's tiresome. Sometimes you will just want to roll your eyes back in your head. Oh, you think that's crazy talk, but you don't say it. You say, listen, I'm sure you've read that, but that doesn't mean it's true. And I can point you to a site that debunks this, to Snopes or whatever, and read that and just keep working away. And again, very, very few people are actually anti-vaccine, and skepticism is a broad range of people with a whole bunch of different concerns, and they can all be addressed.
The fascinating part to the approach you're suggesting here is it really becomes a more interesting and productive conversation because most conspiracy starts with a kernel of truth. Not all, some of it is truly just absurd, but there's usually a kernel of truth that has been spun or a starting point that got misinterpreted or something. And when you validate someone's concern, I understand why you might be concerned about that. Hey, did you know it started from this? But this is the part where there's a disconnect. Then they feel really included, and now they don't feel dismissed. They feel like they can be a part of this conversation, and they understand, okay, I see, now I understand why what I'm worried about isn't worth worrying about. But meeting them where they are also means like acknowledging what the kernel of truth is there and take them along for the ride of where the misinterpretation kind of happened. It becomes a much more interesting story and a much better conversation in my experience.
Yeah, and I think some of the most effective people at countering misinformation are not journalists or scientists. It's just peers. Like talking, the mom who didn't want to vaccinate who now does, that's going to have way more influence on other moms than I ever will.
Yeah.
So getting the right people to interact is important too.
Yeah, same. That goes back to what you said about when to tell a story and when not to. Maybe sometimes you're not the person who should be the face of a story, and other times you really are. And I think that also is the marking of a great journalist, is what stories are for me to tell as opposed to someone else. On the topic of journalism, lots of questions here. I hope that means we have some aspiring journalists in the audience. Someone's asking, do you see a greater appetite from Canadians for science journalism, with so much invested in science and healthcare journalism, with so much invested in knowledge translation over the past few years? Can we expect a boom in health and science journalists?
I think there's a tremendous interest. I know at our paper, just from a purely economic sense, we know that this sells papers. That's why we actually have a big team of science and health journalists, because there is a real appetite for it. So that's really good. I think the problem is a larger industry problem is people are not used to paying for information, right? I get this every day. Your stuff's behind a paywall. It's disgraceful. And I just always say, I have the same glib answer. I say, yeah, it's terrible that Starbucks has this coffee behind a paywall too. I love free coffee, but the information costs money to produce it, and it costs a lot more money to produce good information. So people can say, well, I can get it free elsewhere. And I say, yeah, but a lot of the stuff that's free is just reductionist. They just take it from elsewhere. And when the elsewhere stop existing, we're going to have a big, big problem. And I think that's a real danger. We've lost so much media in recent years, especially that middle I talked about, that really important, I think, small town papers and even large town papers are just not what they used to be. The Globe, the New York Times, they're apart. They're actually doing tremendously well during the pandemic. Our subscriptions are up dramatically because people are looking for a good source of information, but it's the others are struggling, and then it becomes self-perpetuating. You just don't have the people, so fewer people buy it, and then you lay off more people, and they just die. So I think, when I get a public platform, which I'm lucky to do often, I always leave with the same message. I say, if you want to do one thing, subscribe to a media outlet. It doesn't have to be mine. Don't tell my bosses I said that. Subscribe to something. Pay money for information. You pay for Netflix. You pay for your stupid overpriced coffee. Spend a few bucks to get good information. And there's, I think, nothing more important than we can do today than to send that message. Nothing free. Nothing is really free. And people say, we used to have this model of advertising and you got information for free because advertisers, that model is gone. That ship has sailed. There is no more advertising to speak of. And what exists has been gobbled up by Facebook, which is a platform that, how can I state this politely, just steals information from others and profits from it. That is not a sustainable model. Facebook is the worst thing that's ever happened to good information in the world. It's a destructive, parasitic force, and I hope everybody will discontinue their Facebook accounts. Not that I have an opinion on this, but that's the kind of thing that I think has been really, really damaging to journalism and really damaging to good information has been social media like Facebook. Twitter, I think, is a little different platform, but I'm more a fan of that. So,
not without its flaws too, but they're all just slightly different, but very similar beasts. From in my perspective, I think what's really important is what you're saying of supporting some form of journalism, whether that is your local paper or it's a bigger paper, but something, I think. And there's often really great student deals. There's often gift deals around this time of year. So it is worth looking into. I know it's enriched my life to have access to good quality journalism, and that's what I spend my time on. A lot of the time people ask, have you seen this? Have you seen this? Nope, because it's not in the Globe, so I didn't see it or whatever it is. But it's very important, because without that, we can't have independent journalism. And I think we would all have a bigger problem if every journal was supported by maybe something people wouldn't want to see. So I think we have to kind of choose here which we prefer. And this is the model that I think most of us would like. Lots more questions here to go through. Here is one on kind of science-based policy. And it will be fun to see your answer, especially with things moving so much this week. Do you feel that political leaders read science journalists and base their policy on what you write? I would say yes.
I would like to dream that happens, but I don't think it's that. I think it's way more sophisticated than that. I think I am way less critical of politicians than I was 20 or 30 years ago, because I understand the limitations of what they do. They have to speak to their, especially the way our politics is shaped now, is they have to speak to their base and they have to respond to it. I never say science-based policy anymore. I say science-informed, because I think that's the best we can hope for, is they have the information and then they choose to do something, which is usually not the full thing they should do, because there are political and social limitations. So we have to recognize those. That's not a bad thing, but my job is to keep hammering away and say that's not good enough. And I think it's important. I don't think we do it enough in journalism, is praise politicians when they do the right thing. I think we have a lot of hammers and we don't have a lot of kudos often enough. So we should give them credit when they do stuff. So I often say, during the pandemic, I've been very laudatory of the BC government, because I think the BC government, one of the things they did the best is they just got out of the way. They said, we're letting public health handle this. And they were very quiet, especially early in the pandemic. The health minister and the premier in BC were just like, hey, let Bonnie Henry, we're going to follow her lead and do what she says. And that's how it should be. But we have to recognize that, and we have to honor it. But yeah, I recognize that. No, I don't think that anybody reads the paper and reads my column and says, oh, we should do that today, in Ontario. I think it's more complicated than that, but I hope that it has a little bit of an influence. I often say, I think my job is to kind of be like this water torture test. I just kind of drip away, keep poking away at people and hope that something sinks in and they eventually.
That's horrible. So. I'll give you a more positive analogy than that. Well, I think certainly you have the power of influence, right? Which is very important in getting many people to get on board with policy issues that may otherwise be ignored. And I think that's like the real value here, is that you're bringing awareness to things that we'll need in a democracy many people to understand, so that they can favor these otherwise more vague and nuanced policies that wouldn't be on our minds, because they're more detailed than we would need to know as someone who doesn't work in those fields. So that power of influence, I think, without a doubt, has had many changes, has resulted in many changes being implemented, even throughout the last year and a half. I've seen that, and many more before then too. So more than just a water torture test.
But I think the best you can hope for is essentially, get a discussion going. That's ultimately what we try to do. So.
A great question in the chat would be if you have any other favorite sources for healthcare in Canada that you'd be comfortable sharing, so that people who want to keep learning more on this topic can get to know some of your sources too.
I read really broadly. I think that's the most important thing. And, it's great to have a favorite paper or whatever, but I think just read a lot of everything, whatever you can get your hands on, I think is the most important. I'm a big fan. I think, as some people probably know, I spend way too much time on Twitter. But for me, Twitter it's like anything. It's how you use it that's important. And I use it as my news feed. So 20 years ago, I would come into my office and I literally had a pile of 10 newspapers every morning, and I would leaf through them to look for stuff. And now I do that on Twitter. I have, way too many tabs open, and I go through systematically different media and different people. So you can follow, I follow a lot of my fellow health journalists around the world on Twitter, and that's a really good way of getting a view from around the world. Helen Branswell at Stat News, and Julia in Vox.com, and Kai Kapper-Smith at Science Magazine. So you just follow, I just sort of suck it all in on Twitter and click on their links and read it. So there's not one source for me. It's a whole bunch of stuff.
And keeping that global perspective too is very helpful, because I think that's been a big downfall, is we've been not only forgetting history, but also forgetting that there's a whole world outside of our country or our public health unit, and remembering that we can, or noticing we can learn lessons from other places as well as other points in time.
And I think you're right. I think that's especially important in Canada because we have this big elephant next door. We get so much American media, and it's not what the world thinks. It's very different. So yeah, I have the advantage. I read a lot of French media. So if you can read Le Monde, you get a very different perspective. El País, I know the health journalists well. We exchange stuff, the German media. So you read that stuff, and it's so easy now to read even if you don't speak the languages in translation. It's so easy to access that stuff, and it really gives you a different and I think better perspective than just all the American stuff, which there are great American journalists as well, but it's not the be all and end all.
Yeah, and it's such a unique perspective too, that if you're only reading that, then you'll miss a lot of the world news for sure, but also a lot of the story. Now, I'm going to do a quick shout out for TweetDeck here and making lists on Twitter, because I think that definitely makes life a lot easier to avoid the doom scroll. I think Twitter's great too, but it can get very depressing late at night. So putting a timer on your phone so that it times you out after some amount on social media is a great habit. And also using lists or things like TweetDeck so that you're just looking at curated feeds rather than the whole storm. That's advice I should also take better myself. I'm not sure if you use those tools, but
I should use them more. I don't use TweetDeck enough. I tend to do a little bit too much doom scrolling as someone who sleeps badly, but I don't recommend that to others.
I mean, same, which is why I said it. But I know after this, I'll probably go do that. That's excellent. I want to ask you, as one of our final questions here, we've talked a lot about, I think, as always, you've given us a lot of the good and the bad here, a lot of different perspectives to keep in mind. Can you give people two things? One, a silver lining of the pandemic, silver lining things, when things feel very scary right now, what to look out for, and then what we can look out for in general in 2022.
Well, I think there's a lot of silver linings actually out of the pandemic. I think on today's topic, the one is just the interest in science. The science has been truly miraculous. No one would dream that we would have a vaccine within 6 months, let alone 6 of them. They're highly effective, very few symptoms, etc. So I think people have been, marveled by science, and that's amazing. I think there's a lot more people reading about it, digesting it. We have a lot of complex scientific language in our everyday discourse now. People talk epidemiology like it's nobody's business, and that's
and mRNA. Who would have thought that would be a regular household word? That's amazing.
They talk about it as easily as they talk about hockey, and that's really great. And I think we have to keep fueling that. To me, one of the big long-term solutions to some of this miscommunication we have is education. So I'm always big on, I think ultimately the solution is young people being taught how to read. We do a lot of education, thankfully, has changed a lot since my time when it was about rote learning. Now it's about teaching people how to learn and how to read. And that's the thing I mentioned in passing before that gives me a lot of hope. Young people, I turn to lots of young people like my kids in their 20s. They teach me how to read social media. And they're very much more skeptical and much more wise about how they read than I have ever been. So, and that gives me hope that I think things will change quite dramatically. They just don't get suckered in the way a lot of us older people have been. So that's really good. So to me, that's the silver lining is I don't think I'm a real believer in pendulum swinging. So I think I hope we're at almost a low point of misinformation and lying, Trump style lying, blatantly lying. I don't think that's going to be tolerated for much longer. And that's going to be because the young people are much more sophisticated about how they communicate. So that I think is the big silver lining is this is going to be a lot better the next time. And I guess the bad one, the flip side point is there is going to be another one. The next big pandemic is going to be sooner rather than later. It's not going to be 100 years the next time. We had the great influenza 100 years ago. We have COVID now. It's not going to be another 100 years. We've created an environment that allows these novel pathogens to emerge, and they're going to emerge much more quickly and much more viciously. I think we actually got off fairly easy with COVID. It's awful to say, 5 million dead in the world, but it could have been so much worse, and it probably will be much worse the next time.
And looking forward, I think important silver linings there, important things to stay mindful of so that we can be prepared, so there can be more silver linings next time. What can people look out for from you and in general in the healthcare space in 2022?
Well, I think just, let's learn from our mistakes. That's, I think the biggest problem we have as humans is we have short memories. So just this fact that we've repeated so many things from SARS, we've repeated them today, that we've been repeating the mistakes of the first and second wave in the third and fourth. We have very, very short memories. So I think just hang on to stuff for a little longer. Remember what you were doing a month ago. Don't start over from scratch. So I think that's what we really need to learn to do, is not only read stuff, but hang on to it and hang on to the lessons. So what am I going to be writing about? Hopefully not COVID for much longer, but I think a lot of things have come out of COVID. COVID has taught us a lot about an issue I've been interested in a long time, the social determinants of health, about how people live matters to outcomes. So what was COVID? COVID occurred at the intersection of ageism and sexism and racism. It hurt older people, it hurt women, especially with children, and it hurt so-called essential workers, which is racialized workers. So I think we're going to pay a lot more attention to equality and inequities in society. We see it again with vaccine distribution. So I really hope, I think that's the theme going forward. We're going to pay a lot more attention to that. And in the Canadian context, I think we're going to pay a lot more attention to Indigenous health, which is, again, it's all about social determinants. So I think that, again, is another silver lining. I think we're going to finally look at health as being a lot more than medicine. It's about our environment. And again, climate change plays into that. It's about our social, physical, and political environment. And those are all good things. If we start writing about health very differently than just being medicine, it's going to benefit us all.
I mean, I hope so. I hope that we learn that lesson. I think it's key. I think there's a lot of miscommunication there, which is why I'm so glad that we can now hold you accountable to keep talking about that in the next year. Because again, it's a topic that requires someone like you who takes that big picture and can see how all these different things play into healthcare. It's a lesson that I agree. I really, really hope we see continuing in, and I'm going to hold you to it, but I don't think I need to. This has been so wonderful. Really an honor for me to get to chat with you about this. I've admired your work for a very long time. I saw you speak years ago when I was deciding whether science communication was even a real field, let alone what I could do. And you were really encouraging and really inspiring in that moment, and ever since, to do what I do. And I'm one of many who I know are so grateful for the great work that you bring and the great knowledge and clear writing at such a needed time. There's really no one more deserving beyond just this moment for your whole body of work of this award. And so thank you again, and sincere congratulations again for everything you've done and for the Fleming Medal this year.
Oh, thanks. That's very kind. And I'll throw back the compliment. I think what really gives me hope is that, there's such good science communication being done by younger people like yourself, and so many young people, the Greta Thunbergs of the world out there talking. This is a dramatically different world than one I labored in, and it's going to make for much better science and much better health for the planet. So kudos to the younger people, and keep at it.
Thank you so much. I mean, all on the same journey. You've started the path, and we're all now trying to walk it together as best we can. So thank you so much, and congratulations again. Thank you all for tuning in. I hope you found it I'm sure you found it as fascinating and insightful as I did. There are so many things we can learn. I could keep chatting with you forever, but I know we're at time. So I want to say thank you all for tuning in. Please, if you know someone who you think should be up here next time, who should get the Fleming Medal next year and follow in the footsteps of André Picard, you can go ahead and nominate them. We're looking for someone working in Canada who has made outstanding contributions to science communication, and they will be open nominations until 8 p.m., February 28th, 2022. So start thinking as we celebrate our current very deserving winner, start thinking who deserves to follow in these very big footsteps next, because I think science communication in Canada is really phenomenal and something we should continue supporting and celebrating. So thank you so much, everyone who tuned in. Thank you very much, André Picard, for this conversation. And I'll welcome Dr. Suzanne McDonald back for closing remarks.
Yay. Thanks so much, André and Sam. And again, congratulations, André. That was an amazing, such a thoughtful discussion. I wrote down healthy skepticism versus cynicism. I thought that was really good. And thanks to our audience for great questions. I'm sure most of you have left, but I do have a few exciting updates for those of you who've stuck around. We have information on my Research in France competition. So this year, RCIScience had the pleasure of partnering with the scientific services of the Embassy of France in Canada to deliver My Research in France, which is a science communication competition promoting scientific research and French culture. Contestants who were completing a research project in France earlier this year shared details of their experiences living and working there with the public via social media, all in a bid to win a round-trip plane ticket back to France. We have a winner. Congratulations to this year's winner, Mira Garner, who's a master's student at UBC in forestry, and she studied wine grapes with INRAE in Sète, France, which is in a very nice part of the world on the Mediterranean. You can follow her adventures on Instagram at Ready, Set, Grow. Oh, that's very cute. In the new year when she takes over RCIScience's account. So details of our 2022 competition can now be found on our website. So if you or someone you know is completing a research project in France this year, get involved. You could be next year's winner. That would be amazing. Also amazing is that today is Giving Tuesday. You've probably heard messages all day long about it's Giving Tuesday. And as you've probably garnered from today's conversation, the role of science is vital to our future as Canadians. Trusted science communication is what we do. It's the core of our mission. But we can only continue our work with the support of people like you who share our commitment to building a better country by connecting Canadians with science. If you can, consider making a donation today. There's a link in the chat box. Thanks to the generosity of our Board of Trustees, every gift will be matched up to $5,000. So you'll have double the impact. Every dollar makes a difference. And we hope you enjoyed today's discussion. I thought it was fantastic. Please share your feedback with us and let us know what you'd like to see from us in the future. Again, link in the chat box. And here's a thing that you didn't know. Tomorrow is December 1st, and that is the start of RCIScience's first ever digital Advent calendar. I love Advent calendars. I have a chocolate one, a tea one, and a body shop one. This is a science one, bringing you the science of the holidays. Follow along on our website or social media for a daily science fix, including the chemistry of cocktails, our holiday gift guide, a STEM-themed playlist, and the latest issue of RCIScience magazine, and lots more. So it's an Advent calendar. You have to tune in every day. And we'll be back in the new year to explore the science of exercise. That seems pretty appropriate. Details about all of our upcoming events can be found on our website, rciscience.ca/what's on. Again, linked in the chat box. Thanks everyone for joining us this evening, and see ya. Have a good week.